The knock at 7:42 p.m. The chili had been in the fridge for 3 days. I was stirring it on low heat, leaning against the counter, half listening to the kitchen radio play a weather forecast for the Blue Ridge corridor. Rain through Thursday. Highs in the low 50s. A weeknight in late October, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you. I was 38 then, civil engineer. I lived alone in a small house off Charlotte Street in Asheville, the kind of place with a screened porch and a furnace that knocked when the heat came on. I had no wife, no dog, a sister 2 hours north, and a mother an hour past her. I was reheating leftovers because I hadn't gone to the store on Sunday, and that was the closest thing to a problem I had. The knock came at 7:42 p.m. I remember the time because the microwave clock was visible from where I stood, and I looked at it before I looked at the door. It was a small knock. 3 taps. Polite. I crossed the living room, wooden spoon still in my hand, and opened the door without thinking. The man on my porch was old. 70, maybe more. He wore a wool coat darkened across the shoulders by rain that hadn't fallen here yet. His hair was white and damp and combed back without care. He carried no umbrella. He carried nothing at all that I could see. Daniel Joseph Reeve, he said. Not a question. I have thought about that moment for a long time. The way he said my middle name. The middle name is the part nobody knows. Not my co-workers. Not my dentist. Not the woman I had been seeing in March. The middle name lives on a birth certificate and a tax return and almost nowhere else. His hands were shaking. I noticed that. The right one more than the left. A tremor that suggested age or illness or fatigue so deep it had become physical. But his eyes weren't shaking. His eyes were perfectly still. He looked at me the way a doctor looks at a chart. Reading. Assessing. Not curious, exactly. Confirming. I'm sorry to come without calling, he said. His voice was lower than I expected. Educated. East Coast. Maybe further north. I would have called, but the situation no longer permits it. I should have closed the door. I want to say that now, with the distance of everything that came after. I should have said the wrong house and shut him out and gone back to my chili and let the next 8 days arrive without me. But I didn't. I stood there, spoon in hand, and I looked at this stranger who knew my middle name, and I felt something I have never been able to name, something that was not fear and not curiosity, but the exact place where the two meet. And I waited. Dr. Aldous Pemberton. He stepped into my house with the careful economy of a man who had calculated the distance. Aldous Pemberton, he said, extending no hand. Doctor. Retired. I closed the door behind him. I don't remember deciding to. The chili was still on the stove, and I could smell it from where we stood, and underneath that smell I caught something else. Something on him. A chemical sharpness, faint but unmistakable. The kind of smell that lived in the corners of a hospital basement. Formalin, the fixative they used on tissue samples. I had toured a medical examiner's office once for a structural assessment, and the smell had clung to my coat for 2 days after. He should not have smelled like that. Not a retired anything. Kitchen, he asked. I pointed. He walked past me and sat at my kitchen table without invitation, in the chair facing the back door rather than the front. He placed his hands flat on the table. The tremor was steadier now, as though sitting had calmed something in him. I was with the CDC for 23 years, he said. Before that, 18 years at Fort Detrick. I retired in 2019 for reasons I will not bore you with. I am 71 years old, and I am running out of time in ways that may be obvious to you and may not. I am here because your name is on a list, and I have driven 740 miles in the last 3 days to put that list in front of the people on it. He reached into the inside pocket of his wool coat and produced a single sheet of yellow legal paper, folded into thirds. He placed it on the table between us. I sat down across from him. I did not remember turning off the stove. I had not turned off the stove. He unfolded the paper. 7 names, handwritten in blue pen. Block capitals. Each name occupied its own line. To the right of each name, in smaller script, an age and a city. The list was alphabetized by surname. My name was fourth. Reeve, Daniel J. 38. Asheville, North Carolina. I read the other 6. None of them were familiar. A Marcia Knoxville. A Castellanos in Norfolk. A woman named Audrey Dell in Greenville. A meteorologist's name I half recognized from a Charlotte broadcast years ago. The first name on the list, Kessler, Howard, had a thin pencil line drawn through it. Dr. Pemberton, I said. The name felt strange in my mouth. What is this list? He didn't answer. He folded his hands and looked at me with that still, assessing gaze and asked me a question instead. How did you sleep last night, Mr. Reeve? The question about sleep. I almost laughed. Not because the question was funny, because it was so domestic, so small, so out of place against the yellow paper between us. The kind of thing a doctor asks before writing a prescription. Fine, I said. I slept fine. He nodded slowly. No unusual dreams. Nothing you woke from with the certainty that you had been somewhere else. No. Have you in the past 2 weeks noticed any dogs avoiding you? On your runs, perhaps. In your neighborhood. I run 3 times a week. There is a beagle on Cumberland that barks at every person who passes, every time. I had not thought about it until he asked. I try to remember the last time I had heard the beagle. I don't know, I said. Maybe. Have you received any unmarked envelopes in the last month? No return address. Possibly hand-delivered. Possibly placed in your mailbox without postage. I went still. It had come on a Tuesday. 11 days ago. I had brought the mail in after work and dropped it on the kitchen counter and gone through it standing up. 2 bills. A catalog. And 1 plain white envelope, letter size with my address typed on the front and nothing else. No stamp. No return. I had assumed it was a flyer for a roofer or a real estate agent, and I had thrown it in the trash without opening it. I told him. Pemberton closed his eyes. Just for a second. The way a man closes his eyes when something he was hoping not to confirm has been confirmed. He opened them again, and his face had not changed, but something behind it had. That was when I noticed the watches. He was wearing 2 of them. The cuff of his coat had ridden up slightly when he placed his hands on the table, and I could see them both. The left wrist held a thin gold dress watch, the kind a man might wear to a funeral. The hand stopped at 11:47. The right wrist held a heavier digital sport watch, black plastic, the display reading 4:13. Neither matched the white kitchen clock above the stove, which read 7:48. I have thought about those watches more than I should have. I think one of them was his. I think the other belonged to someone he was no longer able to reach. I never asked which. Mr. Reeve, Pemberton said. His voice had not changed pitch, but it had grown quieter, the way a voice grows quiet when it is asking for something it has no right to ask for. I need you to retrieve that envelope. It's been 11 days. Have you taken your trash out? I thought. I had not. The bin under the sink. I had not emptied it in over a week. I had been busy. I had been alone. No, I said. Then it is still here. The envelope in the trash. I crouched in front of the cabinet under the sink. The bin was halfway full. I dragged it out onto the kitchen tile, and Pemberton watched without moving from his chair. The smell came up at me. Coffee grounds. Eggshells from Sunday. A plastic clamshell that had held strawberries before they went soft. I pushed past the surface layer with a wooden spoon I was still, somehow, holding. Tomato cans. A paper towel I had used to wipe up something I no longer remembered. The envelope had to be near the bottom. I had thrown it away on a Tuesday, and the bin had filled in around it for 9 days. I found it under a slick of old coffee grounds, the white paper now stained brown across one corner. I pulled it out, wiped it against my jeans, and brought it to the table. Pemberton did not touch it. I tore the envelope open with my thumb. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Yellow legal paper, the same shade as his. Folded into thirds. The same blue ink. The same block capitals. 7 names. Mine 4th. But this list was not identical. On this one, 2 names were crossed out. Kessler. Howard had the same thin pencil line. And below that, the second name, a name I had not absorbed the first time, had been struck through in heavier ink, more recent, the line still slightly raised on the paper. I looked up at him. Howard Kessler died yesterday in Charleston, Pemberton said. His voice had not moved from the same low register it had carried since he sat down. The local paper reported it as a stroke at 54. He had no history of cardiovascular disease. His wife found him in the bathtub. His wristwatch had stopped. I did not ask which wrist. The second name, he said. Ms. Audrey Dell, Greenville. She passed sometime this morning. I was informed by another individual on the list approximately 40 minutes before I arrived at your door. He paused. I could hear the radio still playing, very faintly, in the kitchen behind me. A different program now. Something with strings. The outbreak begins in 8 days, Mr. Reeve. I laughed. It came out of me before I could decide whether it was appropriate. A short sound, almost a cough. The kind of laugh a man produces when his mind has registered information his body cannot yet metabolize. I cover my mouth with the back of my hand, and the laugh died there. Pemberton did not react. He had probably watched 4 other people in the past 3 days do exactly what I had just done. He had probably counted on it. He picked up his copy of the list, folded it back into thirds, and slid it into his coat pocket. Then he placed both hands flat on the table again and pushed himself slowly to his feet. The chair scraped. The kitchen radio kept playing. He was leaving. Wait, I said. Project files at 3 a.m. I gave up trying to remember and went to the office. It was a converted second bedroom at the back of the house, the room I had once meant to make into something else. A desk, a drafting table I no longer used, a bookshelf of structural codes, and a fireproof safe I kept my hard drives in. I unlocked the safe at some time past midnight and pulled the 2017 archive, a black Western Digital external, the label written in my own handwriting, the year, and the word projects in capitals. I plugged it into my laptop. The drive woke with a small mechanical sigh. 12 commissions that year. I scrolled through the folders slowly. A municipal parking deck in Hendersonville. A hotel renovation off the Parkway. 2 residential additions in Biltmore Forest. A church gymnasium in Weaverville. A self-storage facility in Arden. A water treatment expansion for the city. A medical office park in Fletcher. 3 small commercial sites I barely remembered. And 1 folder I had not opened in 3 years. Velicor_BMTN_2017. Black Mountain. A private research facility. The client had described it as a veterinary diagnostic laboratory, run by a holding company whose name I had never heard before and never seen since. Velicor Biosystems. I had been brought in for an HVAC retrofit and structural review. The original engineer of record had been replaced mid-project. I never learned why. I opened the folder. The CAD drawings loaded one by one onto my screen, clean black lines against a white grid. A single-story rectangular structure. Concrete tilt-up walls. A standing seam metal roof. 240 feet by 90. Unremarkable on the surface, in the way a tax form is unremarkable. And the basement plans. The sub-basement was 42 feet below grade. 42 feet. For a veterinary lab. I remembered sitting there at 3 in the morning, the day I had asked the project manager about it. He had told me the soil conditions required deep footings and that the additional excavation had been used for archival storage. I had questioned the air handling units next. The redundancy was triple stacked. HEPA filtration in series, with negative pressure isolation on every interior partition. I had asked, in writing, whether the facility was being designed to BSL 3 specification. The answer had come back through legal, an NDA, a non-disclosure rider, and a 1-line directive to confine my work to the structural envelope. I had signed it. I had stopped asking. I had cashed the check. The drawings on my screen looked the way drawings always looked. Clinical. Neutral. Lines describing a building. I knew now what the lines described. I pulled my phone toward me and typed Velicor Biosystems into the search bar. The other names. Velicor Biosystems had been dissolved in November of 2019. A North Carolina LLC, registered out of a corporate services address in Wilmington that I knew from previous work was a mailbox storefront. The dissolution filing listed no successor entity. The signing officer's name was redacted in the public version. I sat with that for a long time before I unfolded the yellow paper again and laid it flat against my desk. 6 names. I started with Marsh Theodore. Knoxville, Tennessee. He was the 3rd name on the list and the easiest to find. A senior engineer for the Knoxville Utilities Board. 26 years in municipal water systems. A photograph of him in a hard hat at a press event, standing beside a mayor. He oversaw distribution mains and pressure regulation across half the city. Castellanos Miguel, Norfolk, Virginia. A logistics manager for a freight forwarding company that handled inbound containers from a port. The fifth name. His public profile listed 19 years in maritime cargo coordination. He moved goods. He moved them in volume. He moved them to specific cities. Del Audrey, Greenville, South Carolina. The line through her name was still wet enough that morning to smudge under my thumb. Retired ICU nurse, 31 years at a regional hospital. She had been semi-public in 2024, quoted in a small local article about a cluster of unexplained respiratory cases that had been admitted, then quietly reclassified, then never mentioned again. The two scientists came next. A virologist at a research university in Raleigh. A bioinformatics specialist who had once worked for a federal contractor in Maryland. Both had publication histories that thinned sharply after 2019. Both had moved into private positions whose descriptions were vague enough to mean nothing. The seventh name was a meteorologist in Charlotte. I half recognized her face from the morning broadcasts I sometimes left on while making coffee. She tracked weather. She tracked, specifically, atmospheric dispersion patterns and air quality. I leaned back in my chair. A water engineer, a freight manager, an ICU nurse, a virologist, a bioinformatics specialist, a meteorologist, a civil engineer who had built a building. Strangers by every public measure. None of them appeared to know each other. None of them shared an employer or a city or a clear professional overlap. They were connected only by a folded piece of yellow paper in a dying man's coat. But sit with the list long enough, and the pattern walked out of it on its own. Every person on that paper had professional access to a piece of how a city functions during a crisis. Water, cargo, patients, pathogens, data, air, structure. And then I noticed the last thing. I pulled up each of their public profiles in turn and checked the small line of metadata at the bottom of each one. The date the profile had last been updated. 6 profiles, 6 dates, all within the last 3 weeks. I reach for my phone and try to find a listing for Aldous Pemberton. The voicemail from a dead man. There was no Aldous Pemberton, not in any White Pages directory, not in any state medical board listing, not in any obituary, alumni record, or institutional archive I could access at 3 in the morning. The CDC's public personnel records went back 20 years and contained no Pemberton at all. Fort Detrick was a closed installation. Whatever was true about the man who had sat at my table did not exist on the side of the internet a civilian could reach. I closed the search window. My hands were colder than they should have been. I called my mother. I did not decide to. I had picked up the phone before I knew I was reaching for it, the way you reach for a railing in the dark. Her name was the second contact in my favorites. She was 67, lived alone in a brick ranch on Faculty Drive in Boone, and answered her phone the way some people answer prayers. Always. On the second ring. Her voice unhurried, the radio audible in the background, a cup of something on the kitchen counter. The phone rang 4 times. Then 5. Then voicemail. You've reached Margaret Reeve. Leave a message, and I'll call you back. Mom, I said. My voice sounded wrong in my own kitchen. It's me. I just wanted to hear your voice. Call me when you get this. Doesn't matter what time. I hung up and sat with the phone in my hand and looked at the screen until it dimmed. Then I searched for the first crossed-out name on the list. Kessler, Howard, Charleston. The obituary came up on the 3rd result, posted by a small low-country funeral home the previous afternoon. Howard James Kessler, 54, of Mount Pleasant, survived by his wife and 2 daughters. Stroke at his home on Tuesday evening. Memorial service pending. The photograph above the text was a candid shot, the kind a wife chooses because the formal portraits looked too formal. He was sitting on a dock, smiling at someone behind the camera. He was wearing a short-sleeved shirt, and his left arm was raised to shade his eyes, and on that wrist was a thin gold dress watch with a brown leather strap. I knew that watch. It was the watch on Pemberton's left wrist. The one stopped at 11:47. I zoomed in until the image went grainy. The same case. The same crown. The same small mark near the 4 o'clock position where the gold had worn through to whatever lay beneath. Not a similar watch. The same watch. I do not remember the next 20 minutes. I know I made a second cup of coffee I did not drink. I know the sky outside my office window had begun the particular washed-out gray of an overcast October dawn. The phone buzzed at 4:17 a.m. The number was a Charleston area code. It was not my mother. The first voice. I let it ring twice before I answered. I did not say hello. Daniel Reeve. The voice on the other end was a man's. Mid-50s by sound. Tired in the specific way of someone who had not slept in days and had stopped pretending it bothered him. This is him. My name is Theodore Marsh. I'm number 3 on the list you're holding. Pemberton came to my house in Knoxville last Wednesday at 9:11 in the evening. He told me to expect a phone call from you, eventually, or from someone like you. I have been calling people on this list for 2 days. You're the 4th I have actually reached. I sat down. I had not realized I was standing. 2 of them are not answering, he said. One of them is dead, as I assume you have figured out by now. One of them refused to listen and hung up on me twice. That leaves you. His voice did not rise or fall. He was reading from no script, but he had given this speech enough times in his head that the cadence was settled. Mr. Marsh, Theo is fine. Theo, did Pemberton tell you what the list is? A pause, long enough that I heard him swallow. He told me what he could. He told me there were things he wouldn't say on a phone, in a house, or in any room with a window. He told me anyone he visited was already being watched within 48 hours. He asked me a question, and I want to ask you the same one. Have you looked outside since he left? I had not. I stood. I carried the phone across the kitchen, past the cold pan on the stove, into the living room. The blinds were half drawn. I parted them with 2 fingers and looked out at Charlotte Street. A dark sedan was parked under the maple tree across from my house. A 4-door, late model, the make hard to read in the gray pre-dawn. The windows were tinted. The engine was off. There was no driver visible. The car had not been there at midnight. I knew this because I had stood at that same window earlier, looking at nothing in particular while the chili burned. There's a car, I said. Where? Across the street. Under a tree. I can't see who's in it. Anyone in it. I don't know. He breathed out, a small dry sound that was almost a laugh and almost not. Welcome to the list, Daniel. I let the blinds fall closed and stepped back into the dark of my own living room. The phone was warm against my ear. Somewhere down the block a dog began to bark and was answered by no other dog. We need to meet, Theo said. There's something Pemberton couldn't say out loud. The drive west. I left the house at 6:14 a.m. with a duffel bag, a thermos of black coffee, and the yellow paper folded inside my wallet behind a credit card I no longer plan to use. The sedan across the street did not move when I pulled out of my driveway. I watched it in my mirror until I turned on a Marymount. Then I watched the road. I-40 west out of Asheville climbs through the gorge before it crests to the Tennessee line. I had driven that stretch 100 times in 11 years of contracting work, and I knew every truck climbing lane and every runaway ramp by feel. The truck I drove was a 2014 Tacoma, 4-cylinder, manual transmission, the kind of vehicle a man buys when he intends to keep it for a long time. 317,000 miles on the odometer. A small dent in the rear bumper from a deer that had come out of nowhere on Highway 19 the previous fall. The morning was bright and dry. The kind of October morning the tourists drove up the Parkway for. I drove with both hands on the wheel and my speed 2 miles under the limit and my eyes on the mirrors more than the road. I stopped once for gas at a pilot off exit 53, just past Newport. I parked at the pump, took my wallet from my back pocket, and walked inside instead of paying at the pump. I asked the cashier for $60 on pump 4 and slid 3 20s across the counter. I had not paid for gas in cash and I could not remember how long. The bills felt heavier in my hand than they should have. When I came back out, there was a black Chevy Suburban parked at the pump 2 spaces over. The engine was running. The driver was a man in his 30s or 40s, sunglasses on despite the angle of the sun, both hands resting on the steering wheel. He was not pumping gas. He was not on his phone. He was looking out his windshield at nothing at all, with the patient stillness of a man who had been told to wait somewhere and was waiting. I walked to my truck without changing my pace. I pumped my $60. I replaced the nozzle. As I screwed the cap back on, I looked briefly at the Suburban's rear license plate. The plate had been smeared with mud. A wide, deliberate streak across the numbers and the state name, thick enough that nothing was readable. The mud was wet, still glistening, in fact, in a way that did not match the dry blacktop or the cloudless sky. Someone had applied that mud within the last few minutes. There was no mud on the rest of the vehicle. I got in my truck. 2 miles later, I took the next exit. I did not get back on the interstate. The diner at mile 84. Carla sat at the bottom of an off-ramp on a stretch of Highway 25E where the road bent through hill country and the cell signal dropped to 1 bar. A long, low building with vinyl siding and a gravel parking lot. A hand-painted sign of a coffee cup in the window. The kind of place truckers stopped at because the booths were big enough to lean against and the waitresses did not ask questions. I took the booth at the back, facing the door. I had been there 9 minutes when he walked in. Theodore Marsh was 52 and looked older. 6 feet, lean, the weathered face of a man who had spent most of his career outdoors in conditions that did not flatter the skin. He wore a brown Carhartt jacket over a flannel button-down and a pair of work boots that had been polished sometime in the last week. He carried a manila folder under his left arm. He saw me before I raised a hand. He had been told what to look for. He sat down across from me without offering one. You weren't followed. I don't know that for sure. I've been watching a lot for 40 minutes. You weren't followed. The waitress came. He ordered coffee, black, no food. I ordered the same. When she left, he placed a folder on the formica between us and rested his hand on top of it. Pemberton came to see me on the 17th, he said. He showed me the list. He told me the same thing I imagine he told you. And then he told me one thing more, which I'll get to. After he left, I went back to the office at 3 in the morning and pulled 4 months of pathogen screening logs from our distribution network. We do routine RNA sequencing on the influent weekly. It's a federal requirement. Most of what we find is what we expect to find. Common gut flora, animal vectors, the occasional flu signature when an outbreak's coming through. Background noise. He opened the folder. Inside were printouts. Spreadsheets, mostly. Columns of dates, sample IDs, sequence hits, percentages. 3 sets of logs, paper-clipped separately. Charlotte, Knoxville, Norfolk. I called a colleague in Charlotte, he said. He sent me his data without asking why. I called a man I went to grad school with in Norfolk. He sent me his too. The same fragment shows up in all 3. Trace amounts. Below reportable threshold. Going back, in Knoxville, to the 2nd week of June. He turned a page and tapped a row of numbers. It's not a known organism. The closest match in the federal database is 61%. That is not a natural variant of anything we have on file. That is something built. The waitress brought the coffee. He waited until she walked away. I sent that data to the CDC on a Friday. By Sunday morning, Pemberton was on my porch. He pushed the folder toward me. Witnesses to what? I did not touch the folder. Marsh wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. His hands were steady. The hands of a man who had spent 30 years in mechanical rooms and pump houses and never once spilled what he was carrying. But the surface of the coffee inside the cup did not match the steadiness of the hands holding it. There was a faint, regular ripple in the black surface, the kind of glass of water shows when a truck passes outside. There were no trucks passing. The tremor was somewhere in him that he had not yet given a name to. Pemberton wouldn't tell me a lot, he said, but he told me what we are, the 7 of us, the list. He took a slow sip and set the cup down. We're not targets, Daniel. We're witnesses. I waited. Each of us encountered the program at a different stage. You built the building. I sequenced the water. Audrey Dell, in Greenville, the nurse, she identified a cluster of admissions about 6 months ago that didn't fit any known respiratory pattern. 12 patients. Strange neurological progression. She wrote it up for her hospital's epidemiology committee. The committee's chair told her to retract the report and called her into a closed-door meeting 2 days later. He told her pension was a fragile thing. She retracted. He turned another page in the folder, but he was not looking at it. The meteorologist in Charlotte. Renata, I think her name was. She tracked an aerosol plume in early August that came in from the southeast and broke up over 3 counties. The dispersion pattern didn't match any known fire signature. She submitted a query to the state environmental office. The official response, 2 weeks later, was that a private agricultural operation had conducted an unscheduled burn-off. There is no agricultural operation in that part of the state large enough to produce that signature. She knew it. She filed nothing further. He looked at me. Castellanos in Norfolk. He logged a container shipment last September that arrived sealed, but not on the manifest. A federal contractor showed up with paperwork inside of an hour and took it without inspection. He filed an internal anomaly report. The report disappeared. 2 of the scientists were assigned to early-stage modeling on what they thought was an academic exercise. They figured out it wasn't. He let it settle. None of us are dangerous on our own. None of us are dangerous together in any meaningful sense. We can't stop what's coming. We don't have the access. We don't have the standing. What we have is the inconvenient fact of having seen something that the people running this would prefer no one had seen. So they put us on a list. Pemberton put us on a different list. The 2 lists do not have the same purpose. I asked the question I had been carrying since the porch. Who is doing this? He shook his head. He wouldn't say. The phone called during pie. We ordered pie because neither of us had eaten and because sitting in a diner without ordering food was the kind of detail people remembered. Apple for me, cherry for him. The waitress brought 2 forks and a small plastic ramekin of cream that neither of us used. I had taken 2 bites when my phone began to vibrate against the formica. The screen said Lena. My sister was 34. She lived in a small house on the north side of Boone with 2 cats and a graduate degree in occupational therapy that she was still paying off. She called me on Sundays, sometimes. Not at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday. I picked up. Daniel. Her voice was wrong. The way a voice goes wrong when a person has been trying to stay calm and has just stopped trying. I'm at Mom's. Okay. She's not here, Daniel. Her car is in the driveway. Her purse is on the kitchen counter with her phone in it, plugged in. The coffee in the pot is still warm. The pot's still on. There's a mug she'd already poured sitting next to the sink. Half full. She didn't take her keys. She didn't take her coat. The back door was unlocked when I got here. I came in through the front. I set the fork down. How long have you been there? 20 minutes. I called her 4 times yesterday, and she didn't pick up, and she always picks up. Daniel, she always picks up, so I drove over. The car was here when I pulled in. The kitchen radio is on. There's a crossword on the table with her pen in the spine, and she'd answered 6 clues. I knew that pen. A blue plastic bic she had used for 20 years. Lena, I'm scared. Stay in the house. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone. I'm coming. Daniel, I'm coming. I lowered the phone, but I did not hang up. I could hear her breathing on the other end, the small, uneven sound of a person try to hold a shape. I could not speak. My mouth had gone dry. My hand was on the table, palm down, pressed against the formica, as if I needed the surface to remind me I was sitting. The diner was quiet. A truck shifted gears on the highway outside. The waitress laughed at something the cook said in the back. Carla's continued to be Carla's, indifferent and warm and smelling of grease and burnt coffee, while my mother's coffee in a kitchen 200 miles north stayed warm in a pot beside a mug she had poured and not finished. Marsh was watching me. He had set his fork down sometime during the call, the cherry pie half finished. His face had not changed. His coffee cup had stopped trembling, or maybe I'd stopped seeing it. It started early, he said. I stood. Back roads through the Smokies. Marsh handed me 3 things in the parking lot before I left. A burner phone, already charged, with 1 number programmed in. A folded paper map of western North Carolina with a route drawn in pencil. A roll of cash for $500 held with a rubber band. He did not explain any of it. He told me not to take the interstate. He told me to keep the burner powered off until I needed it. He shook my hand once, briefly, and went back to his own truck. I drove north on 25E, then east on 70, then north again on 321, where it climbed out of the lowlands and began the slow ascent into the Blue Ridge. The road in late October was a kind of beauty I had stopped seeing. Yellow and rust, and a deep red the color of dried blood. The sky above the ridges was clean. The valleys held mist that had not yet burned off. I passed through Hampton and Elizabethton and small unincorporated places whose names I read off mileage signs and forgot. The traffic was light. A pickup with a load of firewood. A school bus on its empty return run. A man on a tractor turning into a gravel lane. I kept the radio on the AM band and scanned slowly. The first station was a religious broadcast. The second was farm prices. The third was a local news segment, mid-sentence, a woman's voice with the practice calm of someone reading copy that had only been handed to her minutes earlier. Continuing reports of unusual admissions at 3 regional hospitals in eastern Tennessee, with similar patterns now confirmed in upstate South Carolina and Western Virginia. State health officials are urging residents to remain calm and to avoid emergency rooms unless symptoms are severe. A spokesperson for the governor's office issued a statement at the signal frayed. I lost her behind a ridge. I drove for another 20 minutes before I saw the convoy. It came down the southbound lane in a long, unhurried column. 6 vehicles, 2 Humvees, 3 M1078 cargo trucks, and a fuel tanker bringing up the rear. National Guard markings, olive drab and tan. The men inside were in full kit, helmeted, rifles upright between their knees. None of them looked at me as I passed. Not one. 12 faces, 12 sets of eyes, all directed forward at the road. That was not how a military convoy moved on a public road. They watched civilian traffic. They tracked it. It was training. It was instinct. The lead Humvee had its hazard lights on. Not its emergency flashers, the red and blue. Its hazards. The plain amber blink that any private motorist used to signal trouble or a slow load. A military vehicle deployed under official orders did not run hazards. It ran flashers or it ran nothing. They were moving south, fast, and they were moving as if they did not want to be on a deployment record. I powered on the burner. Lena answered on the first ring. What was in the basement? Where are you? She said. Past Elizabethton. An hour and change out. Are you still in the house? I'm in the basement. Lena, I'm fine. I went down to look for her. I thought maybe she'd gone to do laundry and fallen. She didn't fall, Daniel. She isn't down here. But I found something. I heard her moving. The soft scrape of cardboard against concrete. A drawer somewhere being slid open and closed. There's a box under the workbench. The one Dad built. She'd pushed it back behind the paint cans where you wouldn't see it unless you were looking. It's a Birkenstock shoebox. The lid is held on with a rubber band. Open it. I already did. She paused. I could hear her breathing through the burner's cheap speaker. A small, reedy quality the audio could not flatter. It's full of newspaper clippings, Daniel. Local paper. The Mountain Times, the Watauga Democrat. A couple from the Asheville paper. Some printouts from online articles. The earliest one is from March. The dates are written on the corners in her handwriting. What's in them? All sorts of things. There's an article about 140 deer found dead on a single ridge near Beech Mountain in late March. The state biologist quoted in the piece said it was probably hemorrhagic disease, but he said it the way people say something when they've been told what to say. There's a piece about a hiker found dead on the trail near Grandfather Mountain in May. No injuries. No cause given. A second piece a week later said his cause of death was cardiac, but the first piece said his family was disputing that. There's a small thing from June about songbirds dropping out of the trees in a state park. Just dropping. There's a story from the local hospital dated August 12th about an unusual respiratory cluster in the emergency room. That story was retracted 48 hours later. The retraction is also in the box. She kept both. She was quiet for a moment. She'd been writing in the margins, Daniel. Little notes. Question marks. 3 of the articles have the same word circled. Containment. I drove. I held the wheel with my left hand and the burner with my right, and I drove. The road was empty in front of me, autumn pressing in close on both sides, and somewhere underneath the steady noise of the engine, I made a sound I almost didn't recognize. A small bitter laugh, one breath, gone before it finished. She had been the smartest person in our family the whole time. We had not noticed. Lena, hurry, Daniel. I'm an hour out. The dogs, she said. What? There are 4 dogs on this street, and they all bark when a car drives past, and they have not made a sound the entire time I've been here. The roadblock at Highway 105. I saw the brake lights at the bottom of the long descent on 105 just south of Fosco. A line of cars, maybe a dozen, slowing and stopping in the southbound lane I was now driving. Someone 2 cars ahead of me put on a turn signal and edged toward the shoulder, deciding something. I let off the accelerator and coasted. The roadblock was set up at a wide spot where the highway crossed a creek and the shoulders broadened into gravel pull-offs. 2 North Carolina state troopers in their gray uniforms stood beside their cruisers with the light bars running. Behind them, 3 black Chevy Suburbans were parked at angles that closed the lane completely. 6 men in dark windbreakers moved between the vehicles. The windbreakers had no agency markings I could see. The men were checking IDs at the driver's window of each car and looking into the back seats with flashlights even though the afternoon was bright. I was 8 cars back. They had not seen me yet. I let the truck slow to a crawl, eased the wheel left, and made a slow 3-point turn in the middle of the road. Nobody honked. The driver in the car behind me watched me with the expression of someone wondering whether they should do the same. I did not wait to see what they decided. I drove back south for 2 miles and turned right onto a gravel Forest Service road I had not driven in 22 years. My uncle had taken me up that road in November of 2003. I was 19. He was teaching me to sit still in the cold. The road climbed through hardwood for half a mile, then narrowed, then forked, and the right fork went up to a ridge where he kept a stand at the edge of a stretch of national forest. I remembered the fork. I remembered an abandoned hunting cabin at the base of it, a small, unpainted thing with a collapsing porch where he had told me the previous owner had died sitting in the front room and not been found until the spring. The cabin was still there. The Tacoma's suspension complained over the ruts. I drove in second gear, both hands on the wheel, leaning forward to read the road. Leaves had settled in the low places and hidden the worst holes. I scraped bottom twice. I kept going. At the fork, I bore right the way I remembered. And I felt something I had not felt since I was a teenager hiking out alone after dark on the same mountain, having lost the trail. Not fear, not panic, a specific and quiet clarity, the kind that arrives when the body understands that it is being looked for. The kind that strips the unnecessary out of you and leaves only motion. I had felt it then because of a black bear I never saw. I felt it now because of men in windbreakers. The road narrowed further. The truck climbed. The house on Faculty Drive. The Forest Service road dropped me out onto a county lane 2 miles east of Boone, behind a ridge where the troopers were not. I drove into town on side streets I had not used since college. Faculty Drive was a quiet curve of brick ranch houses on the west side, set back from the road behind small front yards and old dogwoods. I pulled in at 4:47 p.m. Lena's silver Subaru was in the driveway. My mother's Camry was parked behind it. The front door was open, not unlocked. Open, standing a half, the way a person leaves a door when they're carrying groceries and intend to return for more. I sat in the truck for a count of 10 with the engine off and listened. The street was quiet in a way Faculty Drive was not, on a Wednesday at 5 o'clock, with school out and people coming home. There were no children, no mowers, no televisions audible through screen doors. A swing set in a yard for houses down moved slightly in a breeze I could not feel. I went up the walk. I called my sister's name from the front step. She did not answer. I went in. The living room was as it always was. The same green sofa with the same throw blanket folded on the same arm. The same photographs on the mantel. The clock on the wall above the bookshelf had stopped. 11:47. I had been seeing that time for almost 20 hours. I found Lena in the kitchen. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the cabinets under the sink. My mother's leather-bound address book was open in her lap. She was not crying, exactly. Her face was wet, but she was not making any sound. Her phone was face up on the linoleum beside her. The screen showed a recently dialed list that filled the visible window and continued past it. How many? I said. 23, she said. Most don't answer. 2 of them picked up and didn't recognize my name. I told one of them I was Margaret Reeves' daughter, and she said, "Who is Margaret?" They've known each other for 15 years. I knelt down. I did not sit. Not yet. The kitchen radio was on. Low, the way my mother kept it. A song was playing that I half recognized, something from a station that played the standards. The DJ had not come back on. The song was in its second chorus when I had walked in. It was still in its second chorus now. Looping. Not a long song held a long time. A 4-second segment, repeating. Nobody was at the station. Nobody had been for hours. The signal was running on whatever the last transmitter in the chain had been told to do. The room was perfectly still. The radio kept playing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. One line of text. Get out of Boone tonight. The departure at midnight. We did not move for the first hour. We sat at the kitchen table with the address book between us, and we made a list of what we would take and what we would leave. My mother had taught us both how to make a list under pressure. It was the first thing of hers we used. She had a surprising amount. I had not known. Lena had not known. Behind the water heater in the utility closet, on a shelf my mother had told us was for canning supplies, were 8 5-gallon jugs of water, sealed and dated. Below the workbench in the basement, in a cabinet I had assumed held my father's old fishing tackle, were 2 waterproof totes. Inside the totes were freeze-dried meals in their original cases, a pressure cooker still in its box, a hand crank radio, 2 LED lanterns with spare batteries, a first aid kit that had been opened and inventoried and resealed, a folded paper map of the Carolinas with 3 locations circled in red pen, and a handwritten notebook in her cramped, slanted handwriting that I did not have time, then, to read. The gun safe in the basement opened on the combination of my father's birthday. Inside was his old Remington 700 in .30-06, cleaned recently, and 3 boxes of ammunition still in their factory packaging. We loaded the truck. It took us 2 hours, and we worked without speaking, and we did not turn on the porch light. The Birkenstock shoebox of clippings went between the front seats. The burner went into the cup holder. Lena's overnight bag and mine went in the back. The water and the food and the rifle and the totes filled the bed under a tarp I bungeed down at the corners. We pulled out of the driveway at 11:58 p.m. Lena drove. I had been awake for almost 20 hours, and my hands had developed a small, steady shake that had nothing to do with the cold. I watched the mirror. We rolled south on Faculty, then east toward the bypass. Faculty was dark. That was not unusual at midnight. We turned on a Poplar Grove, and Poplar Grove was dark too. We turned on a State Farm, and the streetlights along State Farm came on for the first 3 blocks, and then went off in sequence ahead of us, 1 pole at a time, as if a switch were being thrown by a hand we could not see. 3 blocks, then 4, then a whole row. The houses behind those streetlights went dark a beat after. I sat very still. It was not a power outage. A power outage took a substation. A power outage hit a circuit, not a sequence. This was a sequence. Someone with access to the local distribution network was opening breakers 1 feeder at a time, in a pattern that walked through the town the way a person walked through a house turning off the lights before bed. We reached the town limit at 12:14 a.m. "Where are we going?" Lena said. I reached into my coat pocket. The address on the back of the list. The yellow paper had been folded and refolded enough that the creases had begun to soften. I unfolded it on my knee in the cab of the truck and held it up to the dome light. I had only ever read the front. I turned it over. There was writing on the back. Faint, in pencil, in a different hand than the block capital names on the other side. Pemberton's, I thought. Smaller, more cursive. The lead had been pressed lightly enough that some of the letters were barely there, as though he had wanted the page to be readable but not photographable. An address. A small route number off a county road in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. A set of coordinates, latitude and longitude, written out to 4 decimal places. A small hand-drawn sketch occupying the lower third of the page. A box for a structure. A line for a driveway. A curve representing a creek or a switchback. An arrow pointing to a turnoff with the letters HW marked beside it. None of it labeled. Beside the address, in the same pencil, 2 sentences. If you make it this far, the others will too. Do not arrive before dawn. I read it twice. I read it a 3rd time. I checked the back of the page again, in case there was anything else I had missed. There was not. 3 hours north, give or take, depending on a road. Out of North Carolina, across the Tennessee corner, into West Virginia. A property at the end of a county road in a part of the state where the cell signal failed and the nearest gas station was a memory. Pemberton had known I would make it this far. He had not promised the others would. He had said they would. The verb tense was deliberate. The note was not a hope. It was a calculation he had made while sitting at my kitchen table with his hands flat on the wood and his eyes on me the way a man reads a chart. I turned the page so Lena could see. She read it without slowing. She read it the way she had read the address book earlier, the way she had read the obituary list in the box of clippings. She had begun, in the last 6 hours, to absorb information without questioning it. I did not know whether to be proud of her or afraid for her. She turned the truck north onto Highway 421. The road in front of us was empty. Not light traffic. Not the late Wednesday thinness of a small mountain town after midnight. Empty. We drove for 2 miles, and we did not pass another vehicle. No headlights ahead. No taillights behind. No cars in the parking lot of the closed gas station at the third intersection. No movement at all. It was 12:14 a.m. on a Wednesday in late October on a regional highway connecting 2 state capitals. That was not possible. It meant somebody had cleared it. The place had dawned. We crossed into West Virginia at 3:11 a.m. and lost the radio entirely a few miles after that. Lena drove the last hour. I held the map on my knee with a flashlight and called turns. The county road was unpaved for the final 2 miles. Then the gravel lane came up on our left, just where the pencil sketch had said it would, and we slowed onto it at 5:43. The lane climbed a low rise through a stand of bare oaks. At the top, the woods opened. The farm sat in a shallow bowl of pasture surrounded on 3 sides by ridge. A small frame house, painted white once, and now closer to gray. A barn behind it. A low stone wall, hip-high, ringed the cleared ground in an irregular oval. Smoke was coming from the chimney. The eastern sky behind the ridge had begun to take on the bruised pre-color of dawn, but the sun was not yet up. 3 vehicles were already parked along the inside of the wall. A green Ford Ranger I recognized as Marsh's. A silver Camry with Virginia plates. A Subaru wagon, mud-streaked, with a roof rack that still had a kayak strapped to it from a life its owner had not gotten back to. Lena parked beside the Camry and shut off the engine. The cab went quiet in a way that felt loud. There was a woman on the porch. She was in her 60s, gray hair, cut short and practical, a barn coat over a flannel shirt, holding a white ceramic mug in both hands. She was sitting on the top step. She was watching the road. She had been watching it long enough that her coffee was no longer steaming. She did not stand when we got out. She watched us walk up to the wall, and then through the gate in the wall, and then up the path to the porch, and only when I reached the bottom step did she set the mug down on the boards beside her. Daniel Reeve, she said. It was not a question. Audrey Dell. Greenville, she said. Retired. You were on the list. I was on the list. I was also, until 2 days ago, supposed to be dead. The line through my name on yours was somebody's wishful thinking. I felt the small, quiet collapse of something I had been carrying. I had not known I was carrying it. She looked past me at Lena. Sister, I said. Come inside. He's been waiting for you. The kitchen was warm. A cast-iron stove in the corner. A long pine table that took up most of the room. 2 arrivals I did not know seated along one side. Pemberton at the head, in the same wool coat, the same 2 watches, the same still eyes. He looked up when I came in. 6 of 7, he said. We're doing well. The tooth still hurts. He talked for almost an hour. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He told us in the same low, even register he had used at my kitchen table 4 days earlier what the list was actually for. Not witnesses. He had let Marsh believe that because Marsh had needed something he could carry. The truth was harder. The 7 of us, between us, possessed the technical knowledge required to reverse engineer what had been done. A structural engineer who had built the facility. A water systems engineer who had isolated the agent in distribution. A virologist and a bioinformatics specialist who could sequence and trace it. An ICU nurse who had documented the early clinical progression. A logistics manager who could track the physical movement of materials. A meteorologist who could map the dispersion. 6 disciplines. 7 people. A complete picture, if it could be assembled in one place with the time to assemble it. He had been dying when he started. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed in February. 11 weeks left, his oncologist had said in August. He had spent every lucid week since finding us. The outbreak the world believed was beginning, he said, was the cover. The real outbreak had been running quietly for 9 months. Small clusters, misclassified deaths, animal die-offs, retracted reports. The thing that would happen in the next 8 days was the announcement. Not the start. The reveal of something already underway, framed in a way that would explain the bodies the public was about to begin noticing. He told us this, and then he stopped talking and sat very still. I asked him what happened now. He did not answer that. He answered a different question instead. He said, "You opened the door." I went outside. The sun was up over the ridge by then. The mist that had filled the bowl of pasture during the night was lifting in slow pale columns. A hawk was working a thermal above the eastern wall. Lena came out behind me with 2 mugs and pressed one into my hand. The coffee was strong and too hot, and I held it without drinking. I thought about the chili on the stove, the wooden spoon in my hand, the radio in the kitchen, the middle name on the porch. Many people had not opened the door. Most had not been given a door to open. The thing that had saved me was not courage and not preparation and not anything I would ever be able to claim as virtue. It was a knock at 7:42 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October and the small, mundane animal habit of answering it. I still have the yellow paper, folded into thirds behind a credit card I no longer use, in a wallet I have not changed in 11 years. I take it out some nights. I let it remind me. The tooth still hurts some days. I let it. The first morning of work. The kitchen had been cleared. The pine table was bare except for a stack of yellow legal pads, 3 boxes of pencils, and a coffee pot that someone had refilled. Pemberton was still in his chair at the head. Marsh sat to his right. The 2 arrivals I had not been introduced to the night before stood now and offered their hands. Maria Castellanos. Logistics, Norfolk. Mid-50s, short gray hair. A wedding ring she turned absently on her finger as she spoke. She had driven up from the coast in a Camry. Her husband had not come. She did not explain why, and I did not ask. Renata Voss. Meteorologist, Charlotte. Late 40s, tall, the Subaru's owner. She had her laptop open on the table and a USB modem plugged into its side. The small antenna lifted like a finger testing wind. The 2 scientists, Pemberton said, had not yet arrived. He expected them by noon. He did not expect anyone else. Audrey Dell took the chair across from me and slid a clean legal pad in my direction. She set a pencil on top of it. She did not give me instructions. She did not have to. We work in pairs, Pemberton said. Marsh and Voss on the dispersion. Castellanos with the scientists when they arrive on the supply chain. You and I, Daniel, on the structure. Audrey will run the clinical timeline alone until we compare her. We have 8 days. We work until we have something that cannot be retracted, something that survives the announcement. Lena had been standing in the doorway. She stepped forward. What do I do? He looked at her. He looked at the box of clippings she had carried in from the truck and set on the sideboard. Your mother, he said. What about her? She had been investigating this since March. I know. I had been watching her file. She was going to be number 8. I did not get to her in time. The work she did is in that box, and it is more complete than you know. You are her daughter. You read her handwriting. You sit with Audrey. Lena did not answer. She walked to the sideboard and picked up the shoebox and carried it to the empty seat beside the nurse and sat down. The hand crank radio on the windowsill came alive at 9:11 a.m. A federal advisory voice, calm, professional, reading a statement. This is an emergency public health bulletin. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have confirmed an outbreak of an unidentified respiratory illness in the southeastern United States. Citizens are advised to. Pemberton reached over and turned the volume down. It has begun, he said. 3 days early. Nobody spoke. The pencil started. The yellow paper. I worked until my hand cramped, and then I worked through the cramp. The CAD files from the Velicor folder went onto the table in printed form. Pemberton walked me through what he knew about the sub-basement that I had not been allowed to see. The floor I had drawn was not the bottom floor. There was another level beneath the one labeled in my plans. The redundant air handling I had questioned in 2017 had not been redundant. It had been serving a second containment shell that no engineer of record had ever signed for. He drew it on my legal pad in pencil. I drew it onto a fresh sheet in ink. We compared. We argued. We agreed. Across the table, Lena read aloud from our mother's notebook. Audrey Dell took notes in a clinical shorthand I could not follow. Voss and Marsh were at the far end with the laptop, overlaying wastewater RNA data against atmospheric dispersion models. Castellanos was on the porch with a satellite phone, talking quietly to a man in Norfolk who still owed her a favor. The two scientists arrived at 11:47 a.m. I noticed the time. I noticed it the way a man notices a fingerprint left on a glass. Pemberton brought them in and set them at the table and did not introduce them to me until later. By then we had been working for 6 hours and the introductions felt small. The radio cycled through its bulletin every 20 minutes. The numbers it reported were already wrong. They were too low. I went out to the porch at dusk and stood at the rail. The light over the eastern ridge was the same color as the morning had been, only running the other way. A small wind moved through the pasture. Lena came out and stood beside me without speaking. We had not eaten. Neither of us was hungry. He said 8 days, she said. He did. It's not going to be 8 days. No. I took the yellow paper out of my wallet. I unfolded it on the porch rail. The names. The line through Howard Kessler. The pencil on the back. The address that had brought us here. I thought about the chili. The wooden spoon. The middle name on the porch at 7:42 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October. The mundane thing had been the choice, not the courage of it. There had been no courage. There had only been a knock at a door and a man with a wooden spoon in his hand and the small animal habit of hospitality that had survived in him because nothing in his life had yet required him to abandon it. I refolded the paper. I put it back in my wallet behind the credit card I no longer used. I take it out some nights. Even now, even after, I let it remind me that the door was open before I knew what was on the other side. And I let it remind me that the people who did not survive were not less careful than I was. They were only less lucky. The list had 7 names. The world had millions. The yellow paper does not explain why I am one and they are the other. I do not believe it ever will.